G'day and welcome to another episode of Spectrum Uncensored. Today I have with me Cath from Melbourne in Victoria. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jamie.
No worries. Could you tell me a little bit about your profession and your business?
Yeah, so I am a speech pathologist, which I think now we're starting to call speech therapist. Try to get the pathology out of speech pathology. Um, and I suppose, not that we really can technically specialise, but if anything, my area of specialty would be neurodiversity affirming practice, which is very much, I suppose, a new part of speech pathology. And something that's only just come into our guidelines for working with autistic people, and at this stage has not been fully defined, and a lot of speech pathologists are trying to find out what neurodiversity affirming practice is, what it means, what it looks like, and it's become I guess, a really big buzzword in the profession. So yeah, that's become, I guess, my area of interest and my thing. And I since started a sort of a side gig business and a website which is called Spoons Advocacy. So if you want to check me out on www.spoonsadvocacy.com. And my name's Cath Fernando, and yeah, so I guess that's an introduction to who I am.
Yeah, I love that. It is I have noticed that it is more and more. I'm seeing it more frequently now. The neuro-affirming and all that kind of thing. Just in every aspect, from psychology to speech pathology to occupational therapy.
And even
But it's
parenting, we're sort of talking about neuro-affirming parenting, neuro-affirming teaching. You can have neuro-affirming anything, really. It's just taking on the values of the neurodiversity movement and applying them to applying them to businesses and companies. And autistic people are everywhere, and
yeah,
neurodivergent people beyond that are also everywhere in every
we're everywhere.
profession, in every walk of life. Wherever there are people,
We're coming for
neurodivergent
you.
people exist. We're coming for you. We're there. I say hiding in plain sight. A lot of the time, hiding in plain sight.
That's true. That's true. And what does neuroaffirming mean to you? Like, what do you kind of define it as,
Yeah,
if you
look,
had to?
to me, I, in a nutshell, I'd say it's that all brains are equal, that every neurotype is valid, that there are not better brains. Like, neurotypical is not better than autistic or someone with tics or someone with bipolar. Every brain has a valid place in this world, has a value to the broader society and to the people that love that person. There are no better brains and worse brains, and we don't see these differences as disorders. But I'm going to be really clear that sometimes these different brains can be disabled, and that's not a bad word. So there's this really fine line between disordered, disabled. Disorder means there is something wrong with you. You are not okay as you are, I guess. And disabled means my interaction, my brain that is different, in combination with the society, the environment, the attitudes, the sensory environment, and so on that I live in, combined together, I can experience disability, and disability is experienced differently by every single person. So two people with autism might have a very different experience of disability with that. There are autistic people who are fine. All right, it's not a bad thing. If you have, for whatever reason, be it luck, be it culture that you live in, and maybe not Western culture, I don't know, you might have autistic people who are happily married, successful in their business, with their tribe, and actually fine. Now, that's not what you hear about very often. It's normally the serious and the significant disability, but we don't judge the autistic person who's doing fine and the autistic person who's really struggling. We don't cause class difference. We don't go high functioning, low functioning, because none of that is relevant. Your
Yeah,
so-called high functioning, or your what we sometimes call high masking autism, there are people that we call high masking, late diagnosed, hard to tell they're autistic. Neurotypical people couldn't pick them. Other autistics might work it out. But your high
definitely.
masking autistic people actually have the higher suicide rates. actually have the mental health difficulties, that burden is borne. And there are people who cannot mask, who don't have the ability to read the neurotypicals or work them out as a secondary. And that's
Yeah.
okay too. There's a different experience of disability for someone who needs more outside help. But what you can't judge what someone's experience is going to be. Everybody's autism looks different. Everybody's other. I've got to talk about neurodiversity beyond autism. Everybody's different neurotype has a different impact on their life depending on circumstances. Privilege is such a big thing. If you've got money, you can pay ADHD tax, for example. That's a real thing, right? If you can't be bothered cooking, but you can order some Uber Eats, suddenly you're at a massive advantage, right? You've got to
True.
look at privilege, education, society. So many factors impact um, a neurodivergent person. And just really, really quickly, I do talk about autism and ADHD most of all. That's because I
Yep.
identify as ADHD. And it's also because autism started the neurodiversity movement. That is an autistic led movement. The ideals and the theories and the autistic led research is fundamental to that movement. And I don't necessarily know as much about other neurotypes. So I don't necessarily know how to do speech pathology with the full view of the dyscalculia community because I just haven't
Yep.
heard from them. There is a lot of talk about stuttering in neurodiversity. There are people who are absolutely against treating stuttering. So that's important for speech pathologists to know. Why is stuttering as a kind of masking? So I'm listening to them, but it's not my lived experience. But I'm listening and I'm just trying to learn from them and explaining to my clients who stutter, there's another school of thought that tells us that we shouldn't be working on this, and it'll explain as much as I know to them. But autism and ADHD have big communities and a lot of presence on social media, and the autism community have a collective set of ideologies, such as the social model of disability and the idea of the person not being the problem, but society being the barrier, such
Yep.
as the double empathy theory by an autistic researcher called Milton in 2012. I don't know all the details about the researchers. The theory of monotropism, which a number of great leading autistic researchers have come up with, this idea of that sort of looking into information and going next level, next level, next level, that attention to detail that is quite common in autism and ADHD. Um, and the double empathy theory, I've said, the theory of monotropism, and other things that are not coming into my mind right now that are, you know, autistic culture and the idea of spoon theory and all of these things that come from autistic culture, I incorporate into my speech pathology practice. And in a ADHD community, which is sort of coming through, and there's so much overlap, autism, ADHD. So I talk about autism, ADHD the most is what I'm saying, but I don't know as much about other neurotypes, but they belong in neurodiversity as well. But I will talk about autism and ADHD the most, as it's what we know the most about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I love the whole like, everybody's brain is important, because we wouldn't have a lot of things if, say, autism didn't exist. Like, a lot
Oh,
of the great inventors and stuff were fully autistic, like, or
oh,
ADHD even.
absolutely.
Like,
Oh, you
I
could pick
was,
them,
yeah, like,
Einstein and all these guys. I mean, we wouldn't still know about time being a constant and gravity being a
yeah.
phenomenon of space time and all of that. I mean, no one's proved Einstein's autistic. We just know. But I did hear one autistic person say, like, every time something was invented, that was an autistic person. So we were all banging rocks together, and the autistic guy goes, "Look, I've made fire because I spent so much time on my sticks. I looked at this in so much detail, I realized I could go the next level." So,
Yeah.
it's just a bit of a joke, but we reckon autistic people have been the ones firing changes
Yeah.
in the world, and that makes so much sense.
Yeah, yeah, and you look at people like Steve Jobs, for example, and
Mm,
you got Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk
mm,
has said a few things where I've gone, like things like, as you were saying, high functioning, low functioning. When he came out and he said,
yeah.
"I'm autistic, but I'm the good kind of autistic," I was
And look,
like,
that's just ignorance. That's just ignorance. That's the thing. If you start to understand the principles of the neurodiversity movement, that is something you have to learn. You don't automatically
yeah,
know that just because you're autistic. Like,
That's
I
true.
didn't even know I was autistic before I started this whole thing. I started to work out I was ADHD because that has a much bigger sort of functional impact for me. But
Yep.
like, just learning about it doesn't mean, just being neurodivergent does not mean you understand the neurodiversity movement, the theories, all of that stuff is to be learned. So, one of the things I did, Speech Pathology Australia, which is like the speech pathology governing body, is I authored this module called Introduction to Neurodiversity Affirming Practice for Speech Pathologists, and it's something available to speech pathologists to sort of learn online in a set of modules. And the research I did going into that was everything I could possibly learn about the neurodiversity movement, its principles, its key autistic researchers that have come over time. Now, every autistic person doesn't adhere to all of those ideas and values or even know about them. So when
Yeah.
you have clients that come in and they say they're autistic or their child is autistic, I like to just have to introduce them to all of these concepts in the first place and say, look, this is
Yep.
how I work. I do neurodiversity affirming practice. We don't see autism as a disorder. We don't use the DSM definition of autism. Not that it's especially wrong, it's the wording, it's the abnormal this and rigid that and obsessive, all of the words. One of the activities that I do in the Speech Pathology Australia module that I wrote is you have to go through the DSM manual and click on all the negative words. So words like abnormal and
Yep.
rigid and um, uh, every sort of negative word. And oh my God, there's so many. Like it's every second word. And
Yeah.
the autistic community, we understand that these things about autism, and I use to define autism, I use a definition by an autistic psychologist called Matt Lowry, who's got this sort of circle of different traits that you sort of go around, and it's sort of interoception differences and it's communication differences and what that looks like. And we um, still kind of a lot of it is the stuff that's in the DSM, but we look at it from an autistic perspective, from a neutral perspective. So, yeah, autism is associated with big feelings and energy levels that fluctuate. So, you just might go to a party and you might, you know, um, navigate that socially okay if you're high masking, but you might be exhausted afterwards. You might need a day to recover. So,
Yep.
it's fluctuating energy levels and things like that associated with autism that the DSM might not pick up because it's just looking at autism through a neurotypical perspective and looking down on it like it's a bad thing. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing is autistic joy, things like STIMs and what we call, SPINs, special interests, which again is a bit of I think we've reclaimed that as calling it a spin, but a special interest, you say Einstein had a special interest in physics, boys and girls. He's a master of physics. So special interest gives you this expertise, and that part of that monotropism is a great joy in discovering information, going next level and next level and next level down that tunnel of finding out more about your thing that you're interested in. Autism is not a negative way to be. We're not
Yeah.
suffering for it. We can be extremely joyful, especially if we're in an environment that allows us to thrive. So autism isn't necessarily a bad thing. And the other thing the DSM does is it has a real bias towards meltdown bad behavior, as they call it. Now, meltdown is not necessarily a natural part of autism. It's a distress. So
Yep.
it's biased towards people who are distressed. So your happy autistics or young kids that haven't been traumatized yet get undiagnosed, misdiagnosed because they're looking for things that are negative and extreme, and they're looking at all of these things that we get really gaslit older people who might have a successful career and a marriage and all that, and then the psychologist going, oh no, you can't be autistic because you're not functioning because of it. For a start, you don't know what difficulties that person has had to get to where they are. Have they worked twice as hard? Have they had to mask really hard? Have they been exhausted and had periods of burnout before then? They
Yep.
might appear to be fine, and they might actually be fine. They might have come to, by luck, I say, and it being an environment that really works for them and that they've thrived in, and then realize, oh, but I am autistic, and then have that gaslighting by professionals is really upsets the autistic community. So they say that self-diagnosis is therefore valid. If you've spent enough time learning about autism and spending time with the autistic community and you know you're autistic, we're good with that. You can say you're autistic and you are. And people don't come to that without a lot of thought. You don't just say, you don't do it to be sexy or cool. You just, you pretty much,
It's not a
you're
fad.
autistic, and you say, no, well, I mean, some people are sort of saying that now, but it really is something that you've had a lot of experiences of having to mask, having, misunderstanding the neurotypicals, maybe in certain ways at certain times in your life. It might have just happened at high school, or it might just be happening throughout your life. It's this constant realize. So we'd say that one of the things about autism is non-intuitive reading of allistic communication skills. That means that you don't read the neurotypicals naturally, but you learn them as a second language. And so the
Yep.
high maskers are like anthropologists. They've watched the neurotypicals, they've watched all their movies, and they're like, oh yeah, I get you now, and maybe I get your jokes as well. I've worked all that out, and so I'm, no one can tell I'm autistic anymore, but doesn't mean you're not anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You've just worked all that out, and whereas the double empathy theory, when you're meeting your autistic people, your tribe, what's happening is older, late diagnosed people realize all their best friends and their person they married and everything else are also neurodivergent, or ADHD,
The
autistic.
pipeline.
Yeah. And we all get along. And, we were joking about before the start of the podcast that the diagnostic criteria should just be put all the people in the waiting room, and if they all get along, then they're autistic.
Yeah.
Straight away, like. So.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's the frustrating part is, as you were saying, there's a lot of negative connotations and stuff like that when it comes to diagnosing people as autistic. But they don't say that about neurotypicals. Like if they
Mm,
worded like what a neurotypical is the same, like
mm,
if they worded what neurodivergent is
yeah.
in like the same way they talk about what being neurotypical is, it would
Mm,
just be, talking about the positives. Like you see all the time people saying, instead of bossy, say they're a leader, things like that,
that's
like
right.
really
Yes.
like flipping it
That
and making it a positive
language.
thing.
It's so true. The language we use on a child, it defines how people view that child. If you're starting to say they've got abnormal communication skills, abnormal ability to have a two-way conversation, you go, oh, they have an autistic communication style that talks around what they're trying to say, that goes on a tangent, that comes in at a different angle. And it's a beautiful, creative sort of way. And the info dump, like, a lot of
Yes.
autistic people don't mind an info dump. I've learnt so much stuff about trains from some of my little clients. I'm like, hey, this is the diesel engine, such a little 3-year-olds. I'm like, that is amazing, you know all that. And I love it. I'm like, tell me more. Like, I actually find, because an info dump is often really interesting because the person who's doing the info dump is passionate. You don't do an
Yep.
info dump in a bad mood. You do an info dump when you're so excited to share some information about something. And just on that thought about the neurotypical diagnosis, there's this lady on TikTok I absolutely love called My Favorite Joe on TikTok, and she does this sort of role reversal. Have you
I
seen
love
it?
that.
Role
No.
reversal diagnosis. So she's got this one called diagnosed neurotypical spectrum disorder. And so it's herself in like a white coat, and she's
Yep.
got herself, she flips between herself in the white coat with a, what do you call that thing that you write on? The
Oh, that notepad. Yep.
notepad. You know what? My ADHD. Okay. And then she flips between that and then herself as the parent. And so she's going, I'm really sorry to tell you, but little Johnny's got neurotypical spectrum disorder. And mum's there. Then she's got herself as a mum going, what? But we've done everything right. We didn't vaccinate him. And then she's gone, I got to try and remember it all because I've shown it to a lot of parents sort of as a bit of a joke. And then, and then she goes, yeah, unfortunately, little Johnny will have incredibly dull sense of all of his senses. He will never be able to feel the tags inside of his clothes. His sense of vision and hearing and touch will all be entirely average. He will only be able to think entirely inside the square. And then the mum's gone, but that's terrible. I mean, is there any positives for little Johnny? And she goes, oh, yeah, there's tons of positives, but that's not how we diagnose kids. You know, we might have to give him caffeine to get him moving like the other kids. Oh, it's just hilarious. She's so funny. And
That's good.
actually, I have a lot of her videos that I show my like some teenage age clients that really laugh at neurotypical social skills and go, she's got this whole one, it's a great session then. You got the kids laughing and it goes, you
Yeah.
know, um, neurotypical spectrum disorder, neurotypical people can't tell the truth. And she'll go, do you like my haircut? And the neurotypical person will lie. They will go, oh, it looks great. She's an autistic person will go, looks the same. You know? And then and then your neurotypical person will say, I'm hungry. And I go, okay, that's interesting. And what they're really trying to say is, let's go out for lunch. And she goes, why can't they say, let's go out for lunch? And, so she really sort of pulls up that neurotypical, she calls it coping strategies, the two-way conversation. So they have to talk
Yep.
about the weather, and they have to talk about, we call this small talk. We have to talk about the weather, and we have to take it in turns. And it's just hilarious because when you look at it from an autistic point of view, the neurotypicals seem to be doing really odd things.
Yeah.
And so it's
It's
all,
like, who's the weird ones?
who's the weird ones? And it's all about perspective taking. I mean, you will hear
Exactly.
a lot of my clients, the parents, they'll often say, "Oh, neurotypicals, they're so boring."
Yeah.
And I think, that's another perspective, and it's a valid perspective, So a lot of the work that I do a lot around friendships and social skills are my kind of main thing, but I do it really differently to the way speeches used to do this stuff. Firstly, understanding autistic communication differences and what they actually look like and how that's different to neurotypical. So really knowing that, I think, is really important for your neuro-affirming speech pathologist, so that you can just see that difference and understand what those differences are, so you can explain them explicitly to autistic people. But the other thing is the two-way perspective taking. Where's the effort from the neurotypicals to understand the autistic perspective? So we're going into, neurotypical parents, neurotypical teachers and classrooms, we have to sort of go in and go, oh, well, that's an info dump. So what you need to do is you want them to not info dump in the middle of the class because you're trying to get the other kids to concentrate. So how can we meet that as a two-way street instead of just telling little Johnny to shut up?
Yep.
Because he's disabled, right? So why does he have to make all the effort to be social, make other people feel comfortable? Why isn't anyone understanding little Johnny? So say, teacher, like, if he's happy to tell you about trains, you don't even have to listen to that. You can let him talk about trains and you can smile and nod. So even for some of my clients, I'm like, okay, is this an info dump? And they go, it's just an info dump. I just want to tell you, you don't have to listen. You don't always have to be 100% tuned into the info dump as a parent, for example.
Yep.
So it's just knowing that that's a thing. And we call it autistic love language. So if someone's info dumping
Yes.
on you, it means I love you. If you look at it that way, so if a lot of parents say, it means I love you, it means I feel safe to tell you all about my favorite things. It is not meant to
Yep.
be a two-way conversation. You do not have to ask questions or interrupt. That's interrupting.
Yep.
Autistic people make great lecturers and public speakers because
Professors,
it's a monologue.
history teachers.
It's an info dump. It's
Yep.
not just something little kids do about trains. An info dump is a way of, I'm doing it right now.
Yep.
Just talking about things that we love and not necessarily having it as a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've met a lot of teachers who are like history teachers and things like that that are
Mm-hmm.
autistic, but it's because, as you say, it's an info dump. They are talking
Mm.
about their special interest and they're doing it for a living. So, like, what better
Oh,
way to
yeah.
go through your life, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with passion. And I think some of the times, autistic ADHDs respond to passion, I think. Look, this is just a personal theory, but I feel like ADHD is when they're really, find school boring. There's nothing worse because I call ADHD the allergy to boredom. Like,
Yep.
if something's boring, I can't deal with it. I can't do it. I
I
cannot.
find it painful too.
Painful. It's like pulling teeth. It's just like,
Mm.
I can't go and walk over to that item of clothing that's on the floor and just pick it up and put it away. I can't. It's not that I
Yep.
don't want to. I really want to, but I can't do it. I need dopamine. I need either Ritalin or to go for a walk or find some way of getting dopamine, or I get my clients to work out what's in it for them. So actually talk themselves into things with
Yep.
ADHD. And I can't remember the point that I was going to make now about ADHD. Oh yeah, passion. So when someone's speaking about a subject, teachers that have real passion for their subject seem to capture your neurodivergent kids who find school boring.
Yep.
I've got a theory about that. I haven't got evidence, but it seems to be, oh, I like this teacher. They're so into it. So I think ADHDers can make really good teachers, especially for other ADHDers,
I
because
feel that's
teachers
true.
with passion. Yeah, do you think so?
Yeah, I had a science teacher like that. He wrote books on science stuff. Like he was really into space and things like that,
Mm.
and he did physics and chemistry and things like that to during high school. And that was the only time I was really engaged in science.
Mm.
Was when I had him as a teacher, and anyone else it was just boring. But he was very
Yeah. If
animated
they're
and very
bored, I'm
into
bored.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
they're just
So
passing the time, then I'm not into it. If you can make me into it, I'll get into
yep,
it. If you can incorporate my special interests even more, like say teachers, like they've got little kid who's into lizards and refuses, a real PDA who refuses to do anything that's asked of them because they've been asked. That's the whole PDA thing. Say, can you make your number line into a lizard story? And then they're like, oh, lizards are involved, right? Now I'm listening.
yeah,
How to incorporate special interests and passion into the things to get the kids involved, and just even knowing that, have you tried using their special interests to get them into this so that they're not and PDA is a whole other thing.
it is. It is.
Yeah, which we could talk about. So PDA, the idea that I can't do it because you've asked me. It's not my idea anymore. Now I can't do it.
Yep.
And then how to, you've got to be so careful. Language, it all comes down to language. As soon as you say, come on, do this, no, not until then, all of these words trigger.
Yep.
And once you've heard them several thousand times, you get immune to being asked to doing things like, I cannot do something you've asked me to do. So then it's all that, let's go to the bathroom instead of brush your teeth.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, look, my toothbrush has all been set up for me with the paste on it. You know what? I reckon I could do this now. You've made it easy for me. And then that's, yeah, managing PDA is a whole thing. Another thing my clients get gaslit about from professionals. They're like, yeah, we told the pediatrician they were PDA, and the pediatrician, I saw them doing this look and writing in their notes, thinks it's PDA. And it's like, well, when are we going to sort of go from all of this stuff being theory to being recognized by professionals as real things? RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Oh yeah.
Like the number of us that have that and know that it's a real thing, I haven't yet met an ADHD. I've met autistic people that don't experience RSD, but
Yep.
ADHD, that sort of
It's very ADHD heavy.
it's ADHD heavy, that sort of, what they say, 20,000 more negative messages by the age of 12. Like, stop doing that, sit still, put that away, concentrate, listen to me. Once you've had, several thousand more times of being told off compared to other people, you just get that rejection sensitivity. It just builds and builds and builds to a trauma response to rejection. And
I
that
call
is
that
something.
ADHD propaganda.
ADHD propaganda. Oh, I love it. Oh, so there's all this new terminology, ADHD tax and ADHD propaganda. RSD. So I actually explain. So some of my clients, so speech pathology clients that come in, and had a boy the other day, and he was in his early 20s, and I shouldn't say boy, as a man, but to me he's a boy. And then he's saying, he got really worried that he'd offended me in the session, and to the point where he actually contacted me afterwards to go, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, we need to talk about RSD. So next session, I'm like, right, first of all, it is impossible for you to offend me in a session, okay? Second of all, you have RSD. And then we talked all about it. We read about it. We looked at it. I think as a clinician, you want people to understand themselves before you can understand others. Like, we're doing all this teaching neurotypical ways, teaching neurotypical social skills. I need to know who I am before I can work out how to get along with others. I
Yeah.
think that's so fundamental. And that's a lot of OTs they teach. They sometimes these sensory profiles, and this person's really sensory around touch. They really love being hugged tightly, and they're really sensitive to pain. A little bit of pain really upset. Who's telling the child this, though? This is information's going to mom, it's going to the psychologist.
Yeah.
The person needs to know themselves, fully. So then you don't get the gaslit. You're like, I teach people to self-advocate and say, look, someone says to you, you're overreacting. That's just a splinter. It's like, well, actually, it's not an overreaction. I've got really sensitive skin. It's so sensitive I can feel the tags in my clothes, and I have got a foreign object embedded under my skin. This is a dead set emergency. This is, and the other thing speech pathologists used to do was this, how big is the problem? So you'd go, I've got a splinter or my house is on fire, which is the bigger problem? And this is another form of gaslighting, because it's like the splinter in that moment might actually feel more like a fully fledged panic. The fire doesn't impact my physical being if I'm not actually in the house. So therefore,
Yeah.
you've got to understand that autistic perspective might be really different to the neurotypical perspective. You can understand objectively that the fire has a worse consequence, but how it makes me feel in that moment might be really different to the neurotypical perspective. So that whole how big is the problem, that used to be a speech pathology kind of intervention for autistic people to discuss how big a problem really is. And again,
Yep.
you've got to really look at both perspectives. You can look at the consequences and be objective about it. You can take these
You got to
things and
define
make
it.
them neuro-affirming. That's right. You can make
Hmm.
something neuro-affirming that was written by neurotypicals. And I know people who've done that. They've taken really ableist programs and managed to sort of bend them in all different directions and make them neurodiversity affirming. And but look, it's just a lot easier to take programs written by autistic people for autistic people in the first place. But again, you've got to consider the idea that the autistic speech pathologists are going to be better at understanding both perspectives, and the neurotypical professionals have to work harder to understand the autistic perspective. And I've got neurotypical speechy friends who've taken programs written by neurotypicals and found it easier to bend those because it helps them because they're written from their perspective.
Yep.
So yeah, it's interesting because I was always like really against any program written by a neurotypical, but I've got to be open-minded to the fact that for neurotypical speech pathologists, I need to understand this from this perspective and the autistic perspective, and it might take longer to kind of, get your head around that. So
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
open to anything. I try not to be too.
it's like assessment questions, isn't it? That
Oh
assessments are
yeah.
written by neurotypicals. I mean,
Mm,
NDIS was created by neurotypicals.
mm-hmm,
But you
mm,
got like your assessments, and I've been following a lady. I can't remember her name right now, but she has started rewriting the questions for assessments like autism and ADHD, and
yeah.
actually defining what they mean by the question. Like an
Mm,
ADHD question was like, are you usually really, really late or really, really early? And it's like, okay,
mm, depends.
well, what do you mean by that? And it's like,
Yeah.
I might be on time, but
Yep.
the things I had to do to make sure I was on time is not normal,
Was hard.
or your
Yeah, yeah,
definition
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
normal.
Yeah,
So,
I had to set a 5-minute timer between every single thing I do in the morning to be on
yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So they don't ask
Yeah.
that question. They just ask, are
No.
you normally really early or really, really late? And it's like, they really need to define what they mean by what they're
Mm,
asking, because it could change
yeah,
your answer. So,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, multi-choice questions are a real thorn in the side for neurodivergent people because we
yeah,
think so outside of the box. You think all the way around the question. You think of all the possible things it could mean, and then you don't know how to answer. This happens so often. Neurotypicals are sort of all in the same way, all on the same page, maybe with that stuff. They're like, "Oh, are you always like, yep, I know how to answer that." Whereas we're like, "Hang on a second, what do you mean? What do you mean by that?" um,
well, it's and that's the thing, is like very literal thinking too. Like, just I had a full
mm.
autism moment yesterday when my best friend said to me, "Oh, yeah, so my brother just does markets now, and he just sells dog shit." And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Dog shit," and I'm like, "Dog poo?" And she's like, "No, dog collars," and I'm like,
Oh
"That's not
yeah, the
dog shit."
dog related shit. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just automatically, and she's got autism too, but I just went straight to
Yeah.
like the literal
Yeah.
thinking, even though
Oh,
that
I
doesn't
just
even
did
make
too when you
sense.
told me that story.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I didn't think that was valuable, but yeah,
Like for
that's
like horse
hilarious.
manure, or I
Yeah,
don't know what's happening
yeah.
here, but yeah.
And that other
Yeah.
thing about like autistic people will often ask 100 more questions to make sure that they understand, and that can look like
Yep.
incompetence, like in a workplace. Like, why don't you understand? It's like, I need to check. So it's, again, like with self-advocacy, I say, let people know I'm neurodivergent. This is the way my brain works, and I might need to ask you 100 questions about this if I'm not entirely sure what you mean. That's going to happen. Let me set that expectation for you, boss.
Set the tone.
Set the tone. This is what I need. And just for autistic people to know themselves, then you can know what to ask for. Then you can know how not to get bullied, gaslit, all these things that come up. Like for a lot of people, they're like, I want to understand neurotypical people. And some people never really will. Okay. So I say to them, when you have a neurotypical person come up to you and say, and not that you have to build a lot of confidence to do this, of course, but I've got kids at school that say neurotypical person came up, I didn't know what to say to them. I'm like, okay, why don't you just let them know when, if you feel comfortable, I'm neurodivergent, so sometimes I don't know what to say, when you come up. So can you just let me know? And I know you might do that very differently depending on the circumstances. You might not feel comfortable to do that at all. But at some point, it's just to remain unmasked in neurotypical friendships, in neurotypical relationships, in neurotypical workplaces. You have to let them know what you need. And when communications break down, instead of just going, oh, they've just offended me so much and I don't know what I've done, say, look, sometimes when I say things, people get offended. I don't actually know why. Just let people know.
Transparency.
Right.
Yeah.
And having someone who's supportive go into the neurotypical workplace should actually explain that to bosses and so on before you go in there, so you're not just fed to the wolves. And say,
Yeah.
if they don't understand their perspective and let them know your perspective. But again, like, what can you do to meet halfway? Let the autistic person be part of that solution. And even little kids with these so-called bad behaviors, which I call pain, is this whole Ross Green, the CPA method for your real PDA kids. He's got this method, which is a great method. Some of his terminologies he's working on getting up to date with the neuro-affirming terminology, but it's all about getting the kid involved in the solution. So you got this kid who keeps doing X, Y, and Z. It's disrupting the class. It's doing this and that. How do we really connect with that child, understand what's wrong, and actually, you know what, they can be part of the solution? So why do you do that? Why are you distracting them? Because I'm confused. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm distressed. They might not have all this language yet, but you start to be able to connect with this child and appreciate that their perspective is not what you thought. They don't
Yeah.
want to disrupt the class and upset their colleagues and upset the teacher. They're distressed and there's something wrong, and we need to get to the bottom of that and understand sensory stuff. Could it be, the noise of the classroom's driving me nuts? I can't even hear the teacher. Auditory processing. All sounds sound the same to me. I can't tell the teacher's voice over the other sounds. So many reasons it could be that we have
Yeah.
to break down.
It's humanizing that situation instead of
Yeah.
just looking at it from like a what is wrong with you perspective. It's
Mm,
trying to actually work out a solution that can work for everybody. You can
that's
negotiate then
right.
if they're being heard. It
Mm,
means that it's a two-way conversation, a two-way street then, and you can teach them all about compromise and okay, well we can't do
yeah.
this, but we could do a little bit of this in here. Would that help? And
Yeah.
kind of brainstorming together as a unit instead of just kind of taking it upon yourself to
Yeah.
think that you know what's best for that person, because I
That's
mean
right.
it doesn't work like that. But what would you
Doesn't work like that.
say, or why would you say your profession is so important?
Oh, look, this speech pathologists are sometimes the very frontline intervention for early intervention autism. So now autism's getting diagnosed all over the place. It's getting a lot of funding from the NDIS because they realise the value of early intervention, which is valuable for kids with these disabilities. And speech pathology often comes up first because parents want their child to talk, and if there's taking longer to talk, or they're gestalt, I'm not sure how to say it, language processes, that's kids who speak from lines off the TV or echolalic, which means that they've got another step towards understanding that individual words mean one thing, and then you can put them together and make sentences. There's new ways of intervening, even with the gestalt language communicators, to break down those long phrases into shorter phrases. So speech pathologists really come first for people who are non-speaking. We provide other options such as AAC, which is basically like using an iPad with software on it that you can talk with, so that someone's needs they can communicate. Communication is a human right. Speech pathologists end up being often the very first people after maybe your pediatrician that parents and children will see when they're first diagnosed, or even before they're diagnosed. So it's so important for speech pathologists to start off with the right language that's affirming, language that makes their clients feel safe, language that stops clients from masking. Even for speech pathologists, our clients, often their parents are autistic too, right? Like there's this, two neurotypical people don't have autistic kids often. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but So the parents might be undiagnosed autistic, the kids are autistic. You just need to be, if you're starting to go, I'm really sorry to tell you this child's autistic, I'm so sorry. If you're starting off like that, like this is the worst thing in the world. That's not a great
Yeah.
start. So like, you know what? This might be disabling. You might need to parent really differently, but your child has every chance of being successful, loved, an amazing person. They're not different now that they're autistic. You can't assume the worst for them. We're going to assume the absolute best for them. And I'm going to teach you how to parent and bond with your child and make them as the best person they can possibly be. And, you know, some of us are like Greta Thunberg and Hannah Gadsby. And, you know, I mean, you don't want to set the tone that there's good autism, bad autism. You just say, your child, we're going to make them be the absolute best that they can possibly be. And we're going to work together. It's going to be great. And, you know, there are so many autistic people helping us on this journey now who are writing programs such as the Sea Bridges program, is a social skills program for 5 to 8 year olds, you know, written by autistic people for autistic people. There's Autism Level Up, talks about how to manage energy, the spoon theory. There's so many autistic led theories that will really help these families to navigate this space. And it's so affirming because we're looking to the autistic community for our guidelines and for that lived experience over research evidence where research hasn't necessarily asked the right questions or included the right people. So
Yeah, I feel like, you know, diagnosis day is not doomsday, and that is very much pushed upon us
ah
from the get-go that it's a bad
yeah,
thing. But
well, it's like it should be like, your child is autistic, congratulations.
yeah,
They
yeah,
might think outside the square. They might be super creative. They might do things in a way that no one's ever done before, and you're going to love it. You're going to love it if you're allowed to
exactly.
love it. If you're allowed to, yeah, I mean, parenting is harder. It is hard work, parenting and advocating. You have to be on the ball. You can't assume that schools and everyone's got your back. You've got to get in there and you've got to advocate for your kids. And that's one of the things that I really try to do with my Spoons advocacy is, if people contact me and they want me to get into their schools, talk to their teachers, talk to parents, tell them how to parent in an affirming way, please feel free to jump on my website and fill in a form, and I'll get back to you. May not be the next day, ADHD, but it'll be within a week. And yeah, that's what I really want to do, is help people navigate this space, this diagnosis, this space, and to do it with that person's, you know, to make that person the best person they can be.
That's awesome. Cath, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's
And
been
you're a
great,
wealth of
Jamie.
knowledge. We're going to have to get
Oh,
you
look,
back because we could
oh,
just
look.
chat all day.
I'm glad that you like the side notes and the tangents and the different ways that I talk. But this is the thing, it's like, you know, sometimes those side conversations are the best ones.
Yeah,
The ones
totally.
that go
And
off the beaten track. We love
yeah, and
that.
ADHD conversations, it's just
Oh,
like it's too,
anything
if you
can
got
happen.
two, yeah, exactly. It's choose
Yeah,
your own adventure.
we were doing it before the show started. We were talking all over the place. It was great. I loved it. I feel like I've already known you for years. This is
Yeah,
what happens
yeah,
every time you meet someone neurodivergent.
definitely. You got to find your people. But
Got to
thank you
find your
so much for
tribe.
your time. And
Oh, it's been such a pleasure to let me info dump on my special interest.
no worries. I think autism and ADHD becomes your special interest once, especially
Oh,
once you're diagnosed.
yeah, and you realize how awesome it is.
Exactly,
All
exactly.
right. Thanks,
Awesome.
Jamie.
I'll chat to you again soon.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.